Lange here, and guess what? I am not Andrew and Camron. Welcome to Agreeable Disagreements. Did I get that name backwards?
No, I think you got it right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean,
Agreeable disagreements.
Okay.
yeah. Disagreeable agreements would be a little bit more cage matchy, I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah,
Sometimes it's disagreeable agreements.
Welcome to Agreeable Disagreements. Do I sound different? Did Andrew and Camron, what happened to their voice here?
Yeah. So normally this is a show where Cameron and I discuss politics from differing ideologies, but we are excited to have our first guest host, Liz. And Liz, do you want to tell the audience like what we're doing here?
So I actually host my own podcast, Mental Health Matters. And if you might be familiar with that, if you found this podcast through Mental Health Matters. And so I host that with a psychologist. So I'm also in school. And for one of the classes that I'm taking, I need to have a discussion with somebody who has differing political ideologies. And I am good friends with Camron. We live in the same state and we go to the same church. So I also enjoy their podcast. And so I'm like, perfect. Andrew is the exact type of person that I would love to talk to, because from what I've been able to gather from your guys' podcast is that, Andrew, your political ideologies differ from mine, but you're open to discussing it. Yes. Yeah. You have pretty different, because I mean, for the most part, I think I'm more aligned with Camron, which is why Camron is going to a little bit sit this one out, correct?
Mostly sit this one out.
Yes.
And really quick, I do want to take issue with something you just said already. All right, you said we live in the same state, like we live far apart. I'm going to your house tomorrow to play Dungeons and Dragons, right? I could walk to your house in 20 minutes.
Okay, so I live very close to Camron. Andrew lives all the way over in Oregon, and Camron and I live in Indiana, which, to be fair, is not a very large state. But
it is not.
We both live in the city of Greenfield.
Yeah, I was just talking to my parents about this the other day because we were talking about how small our town is, but compared to like where they live, how many people there are in the state, because Indiana has, I think, 3 or 4 times the population of Oregon, but it's like a third the square mileage.
Really?
Yeah,
Is it really?
Well,
wow.
Indianapolis
I didn't
has
know that.
Just Indianapolis proper has about 900,000 people, and the metro area is about 2 million, which is alone about the population of Oregon, or not much lower.
Interesting.
Wait, how many people live in the state?
In Oregon or in Indiana?
Yeah, in Oregon, I think it's like 9 million in Oregon.
Oregon is 4.24. I just Googled it. I just pulled it up. So really Oregon is 4.24 million.
Oh no.
And Indiana is 6.8.
Huh. Interesting. Well, I think Oregon loses a lot to the Rockies, though. Or the Cascades. Yeah, sorry, the Cascades.
Cascades.
Ranges. Yeah, I think they lose a lot.
You lived out there too,
Cascades.
so here.
I know. You would think I would
no one can live
better.
on them. Well, I mean, people can.
Right?
What on the mountains?
You grew up in Oregon. Have you ever tried to drive? You've tried to drive those passes in the winter. It's terrible.
Yeah. I mean, it's like there's so you have like the coast, then you have the coastal range, and then you have the Willamette Valley where I am.
Yeah.
Then you have the Cascades, and then you've got like Bend, Redmond, like Central Oregon, and then
the desert.
Nothing for the next
where I grew up.
True.
Half of the state.
Yeah.
Yeah, it surprises me that Indiana has a higher population because, man, do we have a lot of cornfields. So many cornfields.
But at the same
time,
drive.
Oh, yeah.
And wheat. What kind of grass,
and
Andrew?
trees.
Anyway.
Both.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started, because I know that, Liz, you have kids for one, but I'm assuming your husband is going to be taking care of them tonight.
Yep.
But also, I know that you've got a deadline on your paper. Whew. I'm messing with my lighting while we're doing this. Keep going. I'm just going to mute my mic and let you guys go at it. I'll pop in when I am going to have an aneurysm if I don't talk.
Okay.
All right.
We'll see you in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Wow.
So.
Wow. Piss off.
Wow, the hostility. What did I get myself into? Wow.
That took way less than 5 minutes.
Pardon my French, by the way.
Wow, you guys need to come visit Mental Health Matters and get some calming vibes going on.
Yeah.
I'll show your co-host what agitation looks like. I'm a middle school teacher.
Right? Yeah.
I feel like we have to address the elephant in the room. I'm at my work, and so you get, the audience might see my my boss popping in the background. But
sure.
Yeah. This is not my house.
Right. Yeah. So I'm super excited to do this because in my own podcast, we avoid politics, right? Because our primary focus is mental health, and we don't want to alienate any listeners. Like, mental health it's inclusive of all political, right? Anyways, we try to be inclusive. So
I would say they're almost polar opposites.
A little bit, yeah.
I think politics is the antidote to mental health for most people.
A little bit, yeah. They don't always mix. Well, and as you've experienced, so you guys recently took a break because you were just so into it was just dragging you down. And
it became like a compulsion, and that can really start to kind of just mess with you.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be involved in politics, you have to constantly be in the news to know what's happening. And the news is only bad. Like, how many reports do you hear of good things happening in the news? And that's going to drag you down into the depths of misery in your soul really quickly.
Well, and as someone who used to work in news, I mean, one of our biggest complaints
the Stockford or the
Ford Words report. No,
report.
The AP government in high school does not count. No, no. But when I was in college, I worked at a newspaper, and one of the biggest complaints that we had all the time, just among the staff, was how mainstream media is more focused on being first and less focused on being right. And especially since the retractions that they publish oftentimes go largely unnoticed. And part of that is because
who's looking those up?
Well, it's not only who's looking those up, but who's going to actively publish, hey guys, sorry, we were wrong again. Our bad.
I mean,
they're not going to market that.
Journalists, hopefully.
Right. Well, the reputable journalists will publish that, but then the press, the company that they work for is going to put it on their website and say, yeah, we did our due diligence. That's enough. They're not going to make it the same big headline that it was when they got it wrong the first time. And the other problem we had, so that was the first one, is media is often concerned with being first, not necessarily being correct. But also, media has realized that it sells. Anger sells. Because at the end of the 100%. Day, they have to make money, and that's going to come through advertising. And the more people they have to see their advertising, the more money they make. And so the more people get angry, the more people want to click on the headline, see what's going on, or whatever. And so the reason why people who pay attention to news and people who pay attention to politics end up very often struggling with mental health is because we're in a situation where it's a self-feeding downward cycle, because everything you see is meant to make you angry, which is meant to make you come back to keep getting angry.
Well, I wouldn't even say it's just anger. I think that it's strong emotions will make your viewers more engaged, and it's much easier to create emotions of fear, of anger, frustration, what have you, than it is to create, feelings of, empathy, compassion.
That's fair. That's fair. Cause I agree. What makes me happy may not make Liz happy. It may not make you happy. So that's
and
fair.
for me,
but I
making
think we'll
you
all get
angry
angry
makes me happy.
Yeah. Well,
Okay, I'm
like,
gonna back.
so,
I'm gonna back out again.
so, all right, let's jump into some of these questions that I have. So, Andrew, how do you describe yourself politically? Like, what party do you identify with?
So I pretty, I mean, not even pretty. I fully describe myself as a liberal Democrat.
A liberal Democrat. Okay.
Yeah.
And so how did you come to ascribe to be a liberal Democrat? Like, what was that process like for you?
So that is actually a really good question. I think obviously, I mean, like a lot of people, I think my parents had, big part to play in that kind of socialization.
Mm-hmm.
But my dad was for good portion of my childhood, he was a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, he described himself as more like a bull moose, kind of like.
I would never have known. I would never have guessed that. Grant, I didn't know your dad that early in your life, but knowing
by the time you met
I would
him,
never have guessed that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the time you met him, though, he had kind of we successfully converted him. But my mom and stepdad have always been pretty, pretty big, like Democrats, progressives. Not so much like the kind of Green Party Democrats. And I think once I started to really pay attention to the news, when I was maybe like end of middle school, early high school,
Okay.
I was much less concerned about like the fiscal stuff, which I think at least at that time was kind of where I maybe could have agreed with with conservatives,
Mm-hmm.
and much more concerned with social issues and the way that I feel about a lot of social issues fits really in line with what the Democratic Party typically has to say about it.
Yeah, so more along the lines of bodily autonomy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the freedom to believe and to be what you want to believe, and that no one should be able to infringe on that right, correct? Does that sound
Right. And not
okay?
utilizing your beliefs to giving other people the grace to be able to believe something and to view it as valid, even if you don't agree with it, which I mean, I'm not saying that that's necessarily what conservatives believe. I mean, Camron and I think are a good example of that.
Yeah.
But oh no, my headphones just went out.
Ugh, that means I have to fill in. Okay, I'll pretend to be Andrew. I'll pretend to be Andrew for the time being. Liberal, lefty, ain't no thing on the right. Full term abortions and lots of gay marriage. Am I?
I don't think he can hear you.
I know he can't. That's why I'm doing this. We do this all the time, and sometimes we cut it out, sometimes we don't. Let's see. What else can I do for my Andrew impression? Oh, beard. I actually have a beard.
To give them a minute.
I
also
your
can't
time.
hear anything you guys are saying.
We know. We are 100% aware that you can't hear what we're saying.
Which is why I'm glad you brought up the full term abortion, because that is one of the things that we're going to get into, or that I was planning to bring up. So
I actually don't know if he's supportive of full term abortions or not. I don't know.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about this in a while.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay.
Are you? Can you hear us?
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
I 100% want to leave in what I said while you were. I did.
That's not fair.
Oh no, you totally should. I mean, we'll tell you. But
I did an Andrew impressions. I did an Andrew impression. So I was like, liberal,
Okay.
liberal, left, left, full term abortions, something like that.
No. Retroactive abortions.
retroactive.
Until they leave your house.
Well, no, okay, so technically we can still abort Joe Biden. Is that what you're saying? Joe Biden's mom
Joe
can still
Biden
have an
has
abortion?
100% left his parents' house. I would say that's a big
okay.
fat no.
Oh, all right.
So I think my
What if I said
camera's
Trump? Would you
fogging
have
up.
agreed with if I said that Trump's parents can still choose to abort him?
I don't want to say anything that will get me in legal trouble.
Hot take. I think they both are aborting themselves.
Ooh, good call. Good
Their campaigns both are sucking right now. That's not what we're here about. I'm going to go back into the shadows.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stay in your lane, Cameron.
Okay, so what do you look for in terms of following, like for your political outlets? Like, so when you are looking in the news, like when you're searching the news, what are you looking for in a news outlet?
I'm looking for, I mean, there's kind of two different things that I look for depending on the source.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly, there are news sources that I consume that are obviously, biased, and they will share their opinions. Things like, even though it's not really a news show, but it also kind of is, like The Daily Show.
Okay.
Or certain, other political podcasts that I listen to.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really important that, I'm aware of their bias, and that they, while it's always important to me that whatever the source is, and, regardless of if they're, sharing their opinions or if they're just reporting the news, that what they're saying is factual.
Yes. Okay.
But I am very aware of when it's like Pod Save America, like they're also giving their opinions while, reporting facts.
Okay.
On the other side, when I'm, I mean, that's really what it is I'm looking for factually based, news sources.
Okay.
And so I really, like, if I read something in or see something on like CNN or MSNBC, which I don't really pay as much attention to those, I'll go to some other news source that I trust to be factually based and not, kind of opinion centered, like Associated Press or Reuters or, that kind of thing.
Okay. So do you have like, do you look kind of everywhere? Do you have specific outlets that you go to? Like, do you have go-to sources for information, or do you just cherry pick, and does it depend on the topic you're looking at?
I think usually what happens is, like, I listen to a lot of NPR.
Okay.
And so a lot of times, maybe I'll hear something on NPR and then I'll want to learn more about it. But I try to make sure that I'm getting information from a few different sources, and not maybe so much. I mean, obviously part of that is to make sure that I'm getting different perspectives, but also just not every, news outlet has the same, like covers the same parts of the same story. Yeah. And so I really like to get a holistic view of the facts, even though, I may not be necessarily getting a holistic view of the opinions.
Okay, so do you ascribe to mostly liberal or liberal leaning outlets? Do you look to any conservative or
only when I need a laugh?
Only when you need a laugh? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think I mean, most news outlets, or at least ones that haven't gotten in legal trouble for lying to their listeners, I would say are left leaning, so they're just more abundant. But I will. I don't really have like a problem with the Washington Post,
Okay.
or I would say that's probably about as conservative as I get. I mean, I do listen to certain more right leaning individuals, but I'm definitely not getting my news from and I know this might bother you. I'm not getting my news from Ben Shapiro or Sean Hannity or
Sure. No, that doesn't bother me at all. So, because I totally understand that Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire, they are very biased. So, and I get that. And I also understand why Ben Shapiro triggers people, because he is really good at that. Because, I mean,
I wouldn't say he's triggering. I just think that his take on things is oftentimes just asinine.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So I am, I guess, relatively new to the political world, so to speak. I started following politics 2020, so like right around the pandemic. And I tried a couple, what was most important to me was to get a well-rounded view. I wanted to hear both sides. And so I've always gone to the Daily Wire, particularly Ben Shapiro, because I feel like he at least is good about he's credible in that he facts checks. And I also like the way he uses logic. He's a very logical person, and if you disagree with that, it's totally fine. And then it took me a while to find a left-leaning, just because, I mean, I originally tried Rachel Maddow, but it was 2020 when I was listening to her, and all she would talk about is how Trump caused COVID and is going to kill everybody. And I'm like, I mean, I'm okay with that you feel that way, but like, there's other news stories. Can we talk about something other than Trump's a terrible president?
Yeah.
So I finally
can I just interject?
Yeah.
I'm very liberal. And I really have a lot of respect for Rachel Maddow.
Okay.
I have the exact same issue when I watch her.
I'm glad it wasn't just
Sometimes
me.
it's just like, okay, we get it. Can we move on?
Yes, you don't
she just
like
gets
Trump.
Fixated. Yeah.
Yes, she does. Yeah. She fixates on what a terrible person Trump is, and I'm like, I mean, okay, got it. Message received. Let's move on to something else. So what I have settled on, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts on. So the left leaning outlet that I used to be consuming about 4 hours of politics a day when I first really got into this. That's a lot. It was. And now, I mean, here I am 4 years later, and my life's different now. Right. And so now I'm only getting about 2 hours. And so, I Ben Shapiro and then the Young Turks, just because they're polar opposites. Okay. So what do you think of the Young Turks? I kind of have an idea that I know Andrew doesn't care for the Young Turks, but I'm curious what you think of them.
You mean Cameron? Cameron doesn't care for the Young Turks. I can't.
He doesn't
I cannot stand
because of the name, which has nothing to do with the historical Young Turks.
No, it's not just because of the name. It's because Cenk Uygur, however you pronounce his last name, was an Armenian genocide denier until he got absolutely canceled for it. And then he didn't really say it happened. He just said, I'm sorry I said that. And then finally, under pressure, was like, okay, you want me to say it happened? It happened. And then later on, went on to continue denying it. And it's not just that.
See, I wasn't
backing out.
Familiar with that. But no, I do enjoy. Maybe enjoy is the wrong word. I will occasionally, follow Young Turks. I guess that's not really I would say I typically probably view their content and trust them
Yeah.
more than I would, Daily Wire.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I don't really, they're not really on my radar.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. Um, so, and this ties in a little bit to what we talked about in the beginning of this idea that, anger sells. So
Mhm.
Ben Shapiro debated Anna Kasparian, and it was a fantastic debate because it was a
Mhm.
genuine debate. Like, the only debates that get any sort of headlines are debates that are reminiscent of the 2020 presidential debate between Trump and Biden that were just ridiculous because, I mean,
It
neither
was
one
just
of them.
noise.
It really was just noise. Ben Shapiro, I think, like it or not, he accurately described it as Chewbacca versus the Swedish chef. And that felt very accurate.
I am having such a hard time figuring out which one is which.
Exactly.
I feel like a case could be made for either one, honestly.
Right? Right. Anyways, and so this debate between Ben Shapiro and Anna Kasparian, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is amazing because they're having an actual debate, right?
Right.
It's not just like sucker punching each other left and right. It was a genuine debate, and that doesn't sell. So
Yeah.
that's kind of why I'm so excited to have a conversation like this, because I think it is so important to discuss hot button topics with someone you disagree with.
Yeah.
So, and so that being said, let's jump into abortion. I'm
Okay.
just going to go out on
Yeah.
a ledge here and say you
We're going to
are
start
not.
off on a real light note. We're going to ease our way into it. We're going to talk about abortion.
Oh yeah, yep. We're going to jump right in. So I'm just going to go out on a ledge here and say you're probably not for late term abortions.
I, so, I wouldn't necessarily say that is the case.
Okay. So tell me
Um,
your thoughts about late term abortion.
Late term abortion. I mean, my thoughts on abortion in general are that I shouldn't be, or that I or anyone who looks like me and has the same identity as me
Mhm.
should
Mhm.
not be making more importantly, the same educational background or lack thereof, meaning
Okay.
not a doctor or medical professional,
Mhm.
should not be making decisions on women's health care.
Okay.
I'm also of the, actually, it's not even opinion. 1% of abortions take place in the third trimester. So it's really kind of a non-issue, I feel like.
Uh,
And
yeah.
those 1% are virtually exclusively medically necessary.
I
So I
agree.
would say that I guess technically that makes me for late term abortions, but it's like, are you for or against polar bear attacks? And it's like, well,
Right.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, I think if you poke a polar bear with the stick, you're kind of like you get what you deserve. But I get what you're
Yeah.
saying. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a perfect analogy, but it's like,
But
it's kind of a
yeah.
non-issue.
I agree, and that's one of the things that I feel like the right likes to bring up is, oh, they're okay with, like third trimester abortions. I'm like, I don't think they are, because I mean, I think at that point it's just murder. Like, if you're aborting a baby as it's coming out of the womb, I don't think that's like, in fact, and I've
I
heard
I
people
don't think
say,
that that's murder. I mean,
okay,
if it was like, oh, I've decided I don't actually want to have a kid, like
mm-hmm,
as it's coming out of the womb, like, yeah, that's murder at that point. But
yeah,
that's absolutely never something that
no,
happens.
no, it's not,
and
yeah,
and I mean, but the things that I hear pro-life politicians
mm-hmm,
saying are detailing these just absolutely gruesome like procedures that can sometimes happen, if
mm-hmm,
in a late term abortion, but it's, I mean, that's going back to the like fear and anger cells. um,
yeah.
and it's, that's just not really the kind of thing that happens.
I tend to agree. So, I mean, I think abortion is primarily a first trimester issue,
Yeah,
right? I mean, it that's
93% of abortions happen before 23 weeks. Six
yeah.
and then 6% in the second trimester.
Yeah. Well, and so and just for clarification here, or I guess to clarify, when you say 6% happen in the second trimester, are you talking about because the second trimester is like 13 weeks to like I think 26 weeks or something roughly that. So,
Maybe I
okay.
added
Yeah. But they
maybe I
happen.
didn't carry the one.
Okay, sure, sure.
93% of abortions happen in the first trimester.
Okay. All right. So your stance on abortion is you feel like you have no part in the conversation because you identify as a male and you're never going to like,
Well,
or you, is
no,
that
what
okay?
I absolutely have a part and a responsibility to engage in the political conversation. I
Okay.
absolutely 100% do not have any right to tell women what to do about their healthcare choices, nor
Okay.
does anyone else who is not a medical professional
Mm-hmm.
or themselves.
Okay. So for the sake of this conversation, let's engage in the political aspect of it because I want to hear your thoughts and opinions.
Mm.
So I'm just going to start by just, uh, abortions. Do you agree that there should be some regulation somewhere?
I mean, I'm inclined to say no. Well, so,
Okay.
okay, but what do you mean by regulations? Like
Okay,
what?
so let's what age or what gestational age? So at how many weeks, at what week do you think abortion is should no longer be allowed to happen? And I want to
Whatever the whatever medical professionals deem to
okay.
be a life and not a life, essentially.
Okay. Okay. So that which is interesting because I've heard a couple of different see, and that's again maybe that's where this conversation can just get so difficult and so emotionally charged is because there are differing opinions. I mean, I've heard people say that a 16-week-old fetus can feel pain, and I've also heard people say a 16-week-old fetus can't feel pain. And so I've
I mean,
also heard
I think reg- I feel like that is like a red herring because
okay.
I feel like the more important distinction, at least in terms of what the medical community, or at least the majority of them say, is that um, 16 weeks is not is before what they consider to be the beginning of life.
Okay. I see. Okay, yeah, I see. I can see what you're saying. All right. So now if you're saying the beginning of life, so it sounds like viability outside the womb. And this is a common argument that I've heard on the left is that, abortion should be legal up to viability. Like if the baby can't survive without the mother, then it's not truly a life. Is that correct?
Um, I I don't know. Like
Okay.
that's kind of the point I'm trying to get to is like
Yeah.
I'm an idiot and I don't know like the nuances of, what does it mean life
Okay.
versus not life? Is viability outside the womb the only determining factor? More like what my answer to these questions are going to be is uh, I don't know, but if a doctor tells me something, I'm going to believe the doctor.
Okay.
But I think in terms of like the political conversation and my views,
Mhm.
um, I think that if a woman believes that it is necessary for her to, seek this healthcare decision, then there should be as few barriers to that as possible.
Okay. So I understand what you're saying. So I want to counter argue with you here a little bit and explain my stance so we can discuss. And I want to just start off just from the get-go by saying that I am pro-life leaning, right? I mean, I don't think just making abortions flat out illegal, I don't think is the solution, and I'll explain why. But I disagree with your premise of, access to abortion on demand. And the reason being is because I think that actions have consequences. And if you are choosing to engage in sex, then pregnancy is a consequence, a potential consequence of that action. And I think just letting women just get rid of that or just erase that consequence, it's a bad habit, right? I don't think that that's just acceptable. Like, if you chose to have sex, then you know that you can get pregnant. I also believe in the sanctity of life. And so, and I think that's also important to acknowledge, because I believe that, and in terms of like life beginning at conception, I mean, I believe in the sanctity of life, like for religious reasons, but I can understand somebody saying, I mean, it's literally just a clump of cells, right? I also understand that argument, but I think that it is too irresponsible just to tell a girl, a 16-year-old girl who is irresponsible, had sex and got pregnant, it's okay, we can just erase that mistake, because that sex is a big deal.
The word erased there.
Okay.
I'm going to take issue with that.
Okay.
Because there are also consequences to having an abortion. And at least 50% of the women who seek an abortion for non-medically necessary reasons used some other type of contraception. And typically the reason why was not because the contraception wasn't effective. It's because they utilized it incorrectly, which is why we should, which is why I think that people who are saying, abortions shouldn't be utilized to as a contraceptive measure or, to escape the consequences of having sex, which, first of all, that's a moral dilemma. And I think most often founded in religious beliefs. And I don't think that has any place in policy decisions.
Okay.
But what I would say is, if your issue with it is that you don't want people to, be using it as like a contraceptive measure, then you should absolutely be advocating for comprehensive and thorough sexual health education for the ages where where kids start experimenting with sex.
Right.
Because if they know how to use contraception and they have access to it, because they're going to be having sex either way,
right.
Then you're going to see a lot less people who are misusing contraceptive measures, and a lot less people seeking abortions for that reason.
If I could interject one thing here that I think doesn't really go in favor of either one of you. As someone who teaches these children, and as someone who was once these children, I mean, I wasn't doing that kind of stuff, but teenagers.
No one thought that you were.
Wow. I don't know if that should be a compliment for my stalwartness in my religious beliefs or an insult. on how nerdy I am. I'm going to choose to take
gonna
that
let you
positively.
decide.
I'm going to choose to take that positively. No, but
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
no, I mean, I don't blame you. That was a great joke. But as much as we try to educate these kids, and I 100% agree that we should, I do think that there should be a comprehensive sex education in at least public schools. As someone who received a comprehensive but not pornographic sex education in public schools, I think that it's very beneficial, and there's a lot of studies that show that it does help. However,
I think pretty much all of them.
Yes, all the studies show that it does increase. It helps prevent unwanted pregnancies. However, that it only helps to some degree, and it's because the kids who would use it are going to use it, and
that's not true.
No, hold on.
Are you saying
Let me finish.
If they get the education? Or,
correct. Yes. Because
regardless of the education,
you've got kids who are in three groups essentially. Kids who are going to figure it out themselves and use the contraception themselves. Kids who aren't going to know about it, but would if they did know. Would use contraception if they did know. And then kids who aren't going to do whatever you tell them to, no matter what. And the problem is with that third group, essentially, right? Because no matter what you do, that third group is going to have these issues. No matter what you do, that third group is going to do whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, with whatever they want. And so I think we just need to, as we're talking about these things, we need to adjust for that human idea of, you can't tell me what to do, you're not my mom.
Right. I think that's kind of fundamentally where we disagree. I don't think that people should be condemned to something that has a physical toll, a mental toll, or subject to other people's moral misgivings because they choose to engage in sex. Because sex is not just for procreation. It absolutely can be, and most often can be a recreational activity within a healthy relationship. And I don't think that certainly you're going to have people who aren't going to be using protection or choose maybe to not take birth control medication, particularly because that's usually on the woman to be taking contraception, and it messes with your system, and there's all kinds of side effects, and we have absolutely no interest as a society in creating a similar contraceptive medication for men who ultimately, I think, a little bit more of the responsibility to prevent unwanted pregnancy, or at least certainly more than is currently expected. I think the responsibility lies. The responsibility is unequal currently.
Which I think largely has to do with the fact that men's only option is condoms, and condoms are the least effective form of contraceptives. So I feel like we could almost separate this into two issues here. So we could take teen pregnancies, which is a whole other issue, and then we could take pregnancies of maybe 20 and over, right? So non-teen pregnancies, and kind of the difference there. So,
before we move on though, I think it's important to say that another reason why there are so fewer options in terms of male contraception is that we still, most politicians are men, and they're the ones making the decisions on, what we're gonna, or not even just politicians, but most men have an unequal level of input into the decisions that would bring about more options for male contraception. And we're not interested in doing that.
So I think there's excuse me. I think that there are a couple reasons for that. I mean, or actually let me back up a little bit. So I think that if that's possible for there to be like an effective male contraceptive pill, I don't know if that's even viable, right? Because
there are quite a few in I believe the final stages of testing right now.
So, but I guess, but it's new, right? So like we know how women's contraceptives work and we understand, and a lot of the way women's contraceptives work has to do with their cycle, right? Whereas men don't necessarily have, I mean, they have cyclical patterns in their sperm production, but women can only get pregnant. There's a very, very narrow window where women can get pregnant. And that's the only window where you really need to prevent pregnancy. Whereas men, it can be one and done. Right.
And so, it can be any age, that's why I think the responsibility should primarily be on men, because we can create a baby at any moment.
But you don't carry the baby, which is why men feel like they shouldn't have as much say in the conversation, is because the responsibility ultimately isn't going to lie on them. And
but the consequences of our actions mean that someone else will have more of that responsibility. So I think it's up to us to make sure that, unless that's something that me and my partner want, I feel like the burden of that, I mean, the burden should be on both parties, but men should do as good of a job as they can to make sure that, like, if their partner does not want to get pregnant, that they don't get their partner pregnant.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, a man can impregnate 5 women in one night, literally, right? I
mean, with enough Gatorade, all things are possible.
Right. But like that possibility exists. I mean, it's not likely, but it could happen. So, and I think also, and I think that's why for so long there never has been, and no one's ever looked into any type of male contraceptive, is because men don't bear the brunt of the consequences, right? And so.
Yeah, because we can absolutely, be irresponsible.
Yeah, you can walk away.
I'm putting that in air quotes because, again, I don't think that recreational sex is irresponsible, but that is my personal belief. And just like, I don't think religious beliefs should be brought into or forced on other people's like political implications. I hold myself to that same standard. But yeah, we don't have nearly as many consequences for an unplanned pregnancy. And so there's been very little interest in developing a male contraceptive. However, if anyone out there is listening, I hear that Bill Gates is offering just an absurd amount of money to anyone who can develop a form of male contraception that wouldn't limit sensation and therefore like encourage men to actually utilize it. So if anyone has any ideas, you could get incredibly rich.
Did you say Bill Gates is?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. He's offering like just, I don't know what the amount is, but it's like more money than anyone could possibly need.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to go back to something you said and just clarify real quick. You said that you think recreational sex is responsible or irresponsible? Or
I think that depending on how it's I think there's a lot of other things that go into it.
Okay.
But recreational sex alone, I do not
Mhm.
think is irresponsible.
Okay. So
That's not
tell
to
me.
say that I think it's responsible, because, not having consent is a very irresponsible way to
Right,
have
right.
recreational sex.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, you believe that people should just be able to have sex whenever they want, as much as they want, if you have two consenting adults. If
Yeah.
they're consenting, if a guy wants to sleep with 10 different women in one night, as long as they all consent, you don't see a problem with that.
I mean, it's not something I would want for myself, but
Mhm.
I don't really care what other people will decide. As long as it's consensual, as long as
Mhm.
it's taking like the mental and physical health of all parties into account, I don't necessarily see any problem with that for someone else. For myself, that
Mhm.
sounds like a nightmare.
That's comforting. I appreciate
That's
that you
exhausting, and
I,
I gotta get up for work in the morning. And
sure. So going back real quick to your premise of what you said, of this idea of like preventative measures. So how is this guy, how are we supposed to, like, aren't there implications of that? So if he is just going out and having sex with all of these women every night, I mean, how do we know that he is checking if they are like, is he responsible for using protection? Is he responsible for making sure she's on the pill? I mean, like, that just
so I think both parties are responsible for. I mean, ultimately responsible for their own health,
mhm.
and again, I mean, physically, but also mentally.
Yeah.
But so hopefully both of them will make sure that they have taken the proper, contraceptive measures, that
Mhm.
they are communicating with each other, and that they are, you know, that they're having, even though it's a very abundant sexual relationship, that it's still
Yeah.
a healthy relationship.
Okay.
I think that it's. I think it should be. I mean, it's there is responsibility for both parties,
Okay.
I'm gonna
but
pop
Can,
in.
mhm.
Not to say anything, but to play the role of timekeeper here and say
mm,
that in the last couple episodes we have gone on long-windedly over our goal of an hour and 10. Um,
Okay.
and so I'm not gonna
our
say you
goal
need.
has that hour and 10 goal went out the window like second episode.
Sure. So I'm not gonna pop in and say, "Hey, change subjects." It's up to you guys. I'm just gonna say, like, this has been
We
a
got to
great
keep it
conversation.
moving.
I do know
Yeah.
that you have to talk about multiple topics, Liz.
Yeah,
That's the
Yeah.
other
I
thing.
Yeah.
want to get to. I could do a better job of maybe being like giving you succinct answers.
No, no, no. I don't
Okay.
think that's the problem. I don't think that's the problem. I just know that, Liz, you said you had to talk about like 2 or 3 different topics, and we're coming up on a
I
half an hour of this one.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think this has been a productive conversation, and I think, my last thing is, I think that, um, I understand what you're saying, but I still think that it is irresponsible of that guy to do that. Like, I don't think, morally I disagree, but I think it's very irresponsible, and I don't know, I think that I don't think that's a good idea.
I
You
so I want to I want to clarify. I
Mhm.
think that I when I'm like answering these questions,
Mhm.
I'm talking more like in an ideal world where
Mm.
if like
Yeah.
there was, you know, uh, uh, good sex education that everyone received, if there
Mm.
was viable, male contraception, if, like if in a perfect world, I don't see a problem with that.
Okay.
In no way does that mean that I'm not fully aware that, like, if I were to see that in the actual world, I'm willing to bet that, like, it's, there's some kind of, like, there might be things that are not healthy about that relationship, even if,
Right.
It is 100% consensual. There's, differing maturity levels, and you have to be able to trust every single person in that, like, kind of polyamorous relationship, that they know how to use contraception, or that they're not lying. So it's a like normative versus nominal argument, I think is what
Okay.
people call it. It's like how things should be versus how things are.
Okay. So I appreciate you sharing this with me. I want to move on to something similar, but a little bit more easy to pick apart. And that is the overturning of Roe versus Wade.
Okay.
I think I think that'll be a really good one. Roe versus Wade.
About Roe v. Wade or about the Dobbs decision?
Let's start with Roe v. Wade being overturned.
Okay. Yeah. So the Dobbs decision, it should never have happened.
Okay.
Why? Primarily because it's not going to stop abortions. What it is going to do is increase the prevalence of unsafe abortions. And it was a decision that was heavily influenced by specifically 3 justices that I think should never have been appointed at all. I think it had a lot of religious beliefs and morality that had absolutely nothing to do with the science of it, or the political. I think it was a decision on morality, and that's not what the Supreme Court should be weighing in on.
Okay. So I mean, obviously from a moral standpoint, I liked the overturning of Roe v. Wade, so I'll just admit that right off the bat. But looking at it from the political side, the reason why I was in favor of it is because it made it a states' right issue, right? So it put the decision back into the hands of the state, which I think is a good thing, because I think that I like the idea of that being more of a state-centered issue rather than just like a federal issue, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think that it's I don't think that is sorry,
You're good.
It's fine. It's not a huge deal.
Yeah. I think that it shouldn't be women's healthcare decisions should not be decided by the government. It should be decided by women and their healthcare provider. So I think that the only thing that the Dobbs decision did was open up states to deny a fundamental right that women should have to make their own decisions about their healthcare. And, you could say that that's a slippery slope argument, but I think, what we're seeing with, Alabama, Arizona before I'm still not quite sure what happened in Arizona, but it seems like they went kind of back and forth. What you are seeing is, the ability to make those decisions for themselves based on their own personal beliefs, their own personal medical needs, and the advice and opinion of their healthcare provider. We're seeing those rights being taken away.
Okay, so what about the rights of the individual that has been created that doesn't get a say, right? So, like, do you think that that fetus doesn't have any rights because it's not sentient? I mean, because that is, like, that has the potential to become a person, a fully
Sure.
fledged person. So, does that, fetus, human being, not have any rights?
No. Uh, they don't. They don't get counted in the census. Until they're born. You can't drive in the carpool lane if you're pregnant. You don't get to claim a fetus on your taxes.
However,
And
sorry, go ahead and finish. Sorry.
I mean that was kind of my final point, and
So
that's why I am not. I don't want to be like I'm not making a determination on like when life begins.
Mm-hmm.
This is all under the pretext of up to the point where the medical professionals determine a life to begin, and I don't know what that point is, and that might change it. But if we're talking about the 93% of first term abortions and 6% of second term abortions, where the virtually the entirety of elective non-medically necessary abortions happen. I'm pretty sure that the fetus being aborted, the medical community does not consider to be its own living entity.
So, really quick, I want to go back to something you said, not because I think there's a problem with anything you said, but I think it ties in to the argument at large, where I think the one thing everybody can agree on is that a government's job is to regulate. What you regulate is up for debate, but at the end of the day, their job is to regulate and define. And you're
also to protect the rights of its citizenry,
which it has to regulate and define what those rights are and what counts as a citizen. You're absolutely right. Protection is a huge part of it that I neglected to mention.
I'm just saying that at no point is their job to tell us morally what is right and wrong.
Sure. However, my issue wasn't with that. My issue was you brought up this list of things like unborn children aren't counted in the census, which is absolutely correct. You're not allowed to drive in the carpool lane. Absolutely correct. However, it is counted as a double homicide when a pregnant woman is murdered.
Right.
So I don't think that's a problem with your argument. What I'm trying to say is I think a lot of the problems that we have with debates like abortion or Roe v. Wade comes down to not only a disagreement on what these definitions are, but contradicting disagreements that the government accepts.
Yes. Yeah.
Or contradicting definitions, that the government accepts. Because they're saying, well, yeah, you can't count them on your taxes, but but it is a double homicide. Well, then what's the difference? Because if I'm murdering someone and it's counted as a double homicide, wouldn't that someone also be counted on taxes? And I don't think that's a problem with either of your arguments. I think that's the source of this argument is what I'm saying.
And because it is fundamentally ambiguous, and in fact I think this might depend on the state, and I also may be incorrect about this, but I think that in some cases, if you were to cause bodily harm to the mother that ended up in in a miscarriage. I almost said death, but I feel like you guys would have called me on that.
Nah.
So it is alive. But that the mother still survived. I think in some cases that they have a different term besides homicide for that.
Interesting. I'll have to look into that because I think
So
you're right.
I think
you're right.
the double homicide thing, that's the way I interpret it, is it's like we don't really have like a thing to call this pretty heinous like crime already, but that
So
you have the added like trauma of, you know, losing your pregnancy, you know, by someone else's harm.
Yeah, I think a really good example of that could be a drunk driver hits a pregnant woman's car and she loses the baby.
Yeah.
Then, you know, that drunk driver should be held accountable for the loss of that life that is lost.
Yeah.
And so again, I think that goes back to Andrew's point of what makes this conversation so difficult is then it's solely based on the value that the mother gives to the fetus. That is solely how these decisions are being based. And so it's like you know, if she's 10 weeks pregnant and she lost the baby because she got hit by a drunk driver, then, you know, she's going to want to seek retribution. But if she didn't want the baby, then then she doesn't care. And that is so ambiguous.
Well, and that's the thing is like, and I almost brought this up earlier, or I intended to bring this up earlier, because you said something about like, abortion, like, shouldn't be used to just like absolve you of all consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of whether you want the baby, losing the pregnancy, or, you know, miscarrying, that is traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
And having an abortion, even if it's a non-medically necessary abortion, or, you know, a necessary abortion that you really don't want to have, but you need to have, that is still traumatic. And I am going to bring up something, and I want to make it very clear. I have full permission to share this.
Mm-hmm.
My sister had an abortion last year. She was, I don't know for certain how far along she was, but I think it was within the first trimester.
Mm-hmm.
It was absolutely a planned pregnancy. They wanted to have a child. She's also pregnant again,
Mm-hmm.
and everything is going well. But that was a really, really tough, a really tough experience for her.
Mm-hmm.
And it with her circumstances, she the baby ended up being having some kind of defect that would have resulted in an inability to survive, but she didn't naturally she didn't miscarry.
Mm-hmm.
And under certain laws that some states have enacted now, she wouldn't have been able to have the necessary medical care, which is, you know, it wasn't a miscarriage. She had an abortion.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's, I mean, it would have been risky if she had been, you know, forced to carry it to term and, you know, give birth to a stillborn baby, or, you know, couple weeks afterwards, you know, had the baby pass away. And so it's, you know, there's, Camron and I have had conversations where it's like, you know, with the Alabama thing, it's like, this is a very specific case, but it is something that leads to dire consequences for people who should not be subjected to, you know, undergoing that kind of traumatic experience.
Yeah, so I will say, and this could, I think this is going to be a good place to end it too, is because it's kind of, I guess, a place where we're going to kind of somewhat agree. So, just to be clear, I will never agree with the woman's decision to terminate a viable pregnancy because I think it is immoral. Okay, I'm going to own my
Right.
bias there. However, I understand that just flat out making abortions illegal is not the solution because, as you said earlier, it is going to lead to unsafe abortions. Because the reality is, and I understand that if a woman wants to get rid of a pregnancy and if she is terrified, she's going to find a way.
Yeah.
And so I understand that it can result in serious harm or the life of somebody if there's, so I understand that just doing away with it because of my morals or other people's morals is not the answer. I
Right.
understand that. And so, to be vulnerable and to be real, when that shifted is when I also had to have an abortion. My second pregnancy wasn't viable, and I went 10 weeks thinking that everything was fine. And then I go to the doctor and they're like, no, this isn't a viable pregnancy and your body hasn't taken care of it yet. So we have to force your body to do it.
Yeah.
And, and it changed my whole perspective because I used medication and I had this thought in my head of, I don't need, and I very, very distinctly remember having this thought of, I don't need all 4 of these pills to go through with this. No one would know if I saved a pill and sold it on the black market. That is not what I did, just to be
Right.
clear.
Right. Wink.
Right. But, that's where my head went is this is why there has to be regulations and why there has to be something is because I could sell that. Or people could and would sell these pills on the black market. And that can and would get women killed because my midwife was in very, very close contact with me as I'm going through this because I did this at home,
Mm-hmm.
which is a little bit dangerous because women can bleed out. It can,
Mm-hmm.
and so, I guess that's just kind of where I want to say is this is a complicated and this is a hard issue. I'm not going to compromise my morals, and I'm not going to say I think that abortion, if you have a viable pregnancy and you just don't want to be pregnant for whatever your reasons are for not wanting to have this baby, I don't think that is an excuse to get an abortion. If it is incest, rape, or the life of the mother, I can understand that. But on a personal level, morally, I'm never going to agree with you. But I understand
Sure.
that my morals don't get to dictate the lives of 350 million people.
Yeah, and I think that's where I'm really glad that we agree because
Yeah.
I totally understand the moral objection.
Yeah.
I think for me, like if I I mean last few years this has kind of changed, but like for most of my life I've really wanted to have children. And if my partner, spouse, what have you, if I were going to be having a child, and my partner didn't want to, I would really hope that like they would at least involve me in that decision making process. And I might object, but what supersedes that is that thing of like, I don't want how I feel about it, like emotionally or morally, that shouldn't be my decision ultimately. And I don't think that I think that like moral opinions are valid, but they should not be used to limit the agency of other people to make their own determination. which is I
And I'll
think
be
where you and I agree somewhat.
I think so. And obviously, as somebody who is a deeply religious person and holds very vehemently to the sanctity of life, I wish that weren't the case. I wish that I could help everybody to see that no, that is, you created a life and that life matters, but I can't, and so that's what can make this conversation so complicated. Okay,
Yeah,
so thank you so much for doing this with me and for engaging in this discussion. I feel like it
absolutely.
was I feel like it was a productive conversation. So I think we had some other topics that we were going to get to.
Yes. Yeah. Do you want to start off?
Yeah. So protests. We were going to talk specifically about the protests on college campus, and I'll just start off with my views on it. And so I think that people obviously have the right to protest, but the minute that it turns violent or it starts just being, your protest gets disrupts other people's lives. And I'm talking about like in a major way. I'm not talking about like you have to. I mean, I think we can have the
That is
discussion.
kind of the point of a protest.
Sure. Okay. Fair.
It's a pretty ineffectual protest if it's not disruptive.
Okay, so I guess let me as long as you are not doing anything illegal, then you have the right to protest.
Yes.
Now, I think that in terms of the college campus protests that have been in the news a lot lately, I have seen pro Palestinian protests go amiss. I've seen pro Israel protests go amiss. I think there was recently, I don't remember which campus it was, but it was a counter protest. Like people were counter protesting the Palestinian protests and they turned violent. And at that point you've crossed a line.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. I think that everyone's been on their worst behavior.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that is a great way of saying it.
Yeah.
Everyone has been on their worst behavior. That is
everyone has been on their worst behavior. I will say, I think that and I'm sure we will get into this later. I will say, I think some people have been on worst behavior, particularly not even on the pro-Israel, pro-Palestine side, but the student or the protesting body versus the campus administration and law enforcement. I think that while the protesters have well, from what I understand, most of the protests that, or at least that like are being reported on, are have not been on public campuses, like public university campuses. They've been on Columbia, which are private schools, and have every right to not allow whatever activity that they want.
Yeah.
So that is a good point to make, the private school versus public school, because as someone who attended a private school, right, everyone is always like, oh, you went to BYU Hawaii? How did you deal with that honor code where you couldn't have a beard or a mustache? Like, I could never. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but I signed up for it. I knew what I was getting into.
What? I did not know about that. And I am personally offended.
Yeah, so you're only allowed to have a mustache that goes to the corner of your mouth. And so I had a friend who got around that by curling his mustache up like Captain Hook.
Was his name Thomas?
No, it was Brian.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, and so
I did not know that.
Right, but I know all these people who are like, well, how did you manage at a university like that? And I know a lot of people who leave. I knew a lot of people who left the university saying, oh, I couldn't handle it. Or they would get mad that they were getting kicked out because they were drinking at a university that says, hey, just so you know, if you drink here, you're going to get kicked out. And they're like, how dare you kick me out for breaking the rules that I agreed to? Like, I 100% love that you brought up the whole private versus public university. That being said,
Hold
lot
on.
of these.
Can I just say, I love the loopholes that BYU students have. For instance,
Oh my
soaking.
gosh. Yeah, I knew
It
you were
just
going to
goes to
say
show
that.
people are gonna do it in anyways.
I'm not even going to acknowledge that because
we don't need to go into that.
it's
But you guys
one of those.
are very innovative and creative,
Look,
and
here's
I
the
have
thing.
respect
That's
for
one of
that.
those things where it's no one knows anybody who's done that. People know someone who's done that.
Sure.
It's always like, I know a guy who knows a guy. It's never, oh yeah, my roommate. I caught my roommate doing this. It's, oh yeah, I had a roommate who caught a roommate doing it. You know, that's
I think
the
that there's
with
more
it.
people, maybe not.
I'm not going to say that stuff doesn't happen.
But because there are such dire consequences, I think you'd
Sure.
be surprised to learn how many people actually are.
Well, and rumors happen for a reason, right? Things like that start for a reason. But that's not the point. What I'm trying to get at is
okay. I'm so sorry.
Back to the protest. Back to the protest. Is this
So hump jumping.
Oh my god.
Sorry.
Okay. So anyway,
Speaking of being on our worst behavior.
shut your face hole. Okay. So
It's gone off the rails. It's entertaining.
No, but you brought up private versus public universities. I will say that a good amount of these that are happening and are still being shut down are on public universities too. So,
yes, but there's
like
also
some of the
legal...
University of California campuses, for example, it's happening.
UCLA.
And
it is still legal for them in a lot of those cases to limit activities and protests and everything to facilitate the like access to or to prevent the limiting of other students being able to utilize university resources.
Right.
And I think while the universities may have the right to do that, I think that they could have done a much, much better job of providing a reasonable opportunity and venue and just set of circumstances so that these protests could happen. Could happen,
I want to
safely
really quick
and.
Oh, go ahead. Safely and
safely and without limiting students' ability to access the resources, but also that's, again, protests are meant to be disruptive.
Yeah.
And also the thing that they're mainly protesting, at least at Columbia, at NYU, at Penn State, the things that they're protesting are for the universities to divest in Israeli defense spending, which they're not getting a whole lot of money from that. So the universities should have just divested.
I will say
they could have
really
saved
quick,
themselves a lot of trouble.
On a similar note, I got a shout out where I went to university for my master's degree, University of Alabama, because from what I've seen,
Roll Tide.
What I've seen online is that it's been fairly peaceable, the protests and the counter protests. And the reason for that is because the universities
aren't allowing journalists on their campus.
Well, I don't know about that, but the reason that they were able to
Columbia.
Well, at Alabama, the protests and the counter protests started actually uniting because they started chanting F Joe Biden.
Oh, wow.
Together, which, is a very Alabama sentiment. But you can see the video where
that's I think that has happened all over the country.
Yes, that is true. And the protests do speak a lot to a lot of the disdain of Biden's involvement. And I could talk a lot about I had a conversation with another history teacher at school about the historical implications and interest of this. And I'm not gonna do it right now because this is for you guys. But just know that I have nerded out about this many times. And essentially what it comes down to is we often talk about political parties switching in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and really that's not a thing. Most political scientists and historians say that's an urban myth. But we did see a switch in which parties adopted an United States isolationist view versus United States wartime view, particularly among President Biden's, or not among, during President Biden's tenure. Because when you see Trump's era, a lot of Republicans were very much, yeah, let's go show Putin what's wrong. A lot of Americans were like, hey, I'll go to Ukraine. A lot of Republicans were very much, I will go to Ukraine and fight. A lot of I knew people personally who were saying that. However,
Yes.
you see that today, you've got more and more Republicans taking an isolationist view, when for all these years moving up to it, the Democratic Party has been the party of, let's get out of Afghanistan, let's get out of Iraq, let's, we're the ones who should be doing America first. And now we're seeing this policy switch, at least in the politician parties. I wouldn't say that it's happening among the constituents. Sorry,
I think you and I need to talk about this in another episode, because I have some definite thoughts about that.
Like I said, it's happening more among the politicians, not among the constituents.
I think it has a lot to do with the cult of Trump.
There's some to do with that. There is some to do with that. But again,
we can't talk about that right now.
No, we can't talk about it. I'm going to mute my mic because I'm just going to keep talking.
Get out of here.
Well, which, I mean, that was fascinating, and I did appreciate Cameron's input, especially as a teacher. Okay, I'm gonna stop. He's unmuting himself.
I'm getting aneurysms. Not aneurysms. I'm not actually getting aneurysms. It's just, it's such a great conversation, and I have to sit here and be like, yeah.
Cameron, you're bleeding from the nose. Oh no, his eyes are bulging.
So it sounds
He's turning purple. Sorry, go ahead.
It sounds like we kind of agree on the idea of protest. Like it's legal, and students should have the right to do it. But when you cross over into doing anything illegal, then you don't have the right to do it anymore. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that there's one caveat that I will say to that.
Okay.
The point of protesting is to be disruptive.
Mm-hmm.
If you are not being somewhat disruptive and inconvenient, you're not going to have a lot of success. And while I think that there's absolutely no place for anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or for, arson, violence against peaceful protesters. What I will say is I don't think that, and I don't know that I'm going to go as far as to say I fully support it, but I think my personal opinion gets a little bit murkier in certain cases where I think where it turns from, a constitutionally protected right to protest versus civil disobedience. Because civil disobedience implies that you are knowingly not following the law or defying the law when it's been deemed in certain cases to not be when the law oversteps. For example, the George Floyd protests, where there was a history of violence and disproportionately aggressive practices by police for when dealing with people of color. And I mean, we've been dealing with it for longer than America's even been a thing. The civil rights was supposed to end it, but we all know didn't end in 1964. And there, have been many attempts to change the system so that, Black people don't get killed for, for a traffic stop or for having or living next door to somebody that the police are trying to serve a warrant. And so I think in that case, when the police responded with non-lethal measures that they were utilizing or neglecting the ways in which they're non-lethal and then became lethal, I do think that there is some allowance, at least morally for me, for civil disobedience. But I think that if you're going to engage in that, that absolutely doesn't mean that there's not consequences.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess because my pushback with that is like, if it's okay to engage in some civil disobedience, I mean, where do you draw the line? I mean, you could say, well, I'm poor and I have no way of getting money. I need money so I can just go rob a bank because I don't have any other options.
I think if you were you and your demographic or for some demographic that you belong to have for decades been denied even the ability to try and make money, then I think in that case, I'd be like, yeah, go steal some bread. You like, if the option to not be poor is not even open to you, then what else are you going to do? I think also what's important, and why I don't think that, the same civil disobedience thing applies to something like January 6th is whether or not the thing that you're protesting against has actually happened. And like disproportionately aggressive and fatal interactions between people of color and police. We know that happens. There was a lot of the January 6th protesters may have thought that the steal happened, but there was overwhelming evidence even before the election, as far back as 2016, to show no, there isn't, and that it was a coordinated effort by Trump and his team, and then people who were not necessarily affiliated with him but supported him, to like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, to actively spread misinformation. And while it's unfortunate that some people got sucked into the lies that were being told, they chose to engage in civil disobedience, and if you're going to do that, you have to be open to the consequences.
Yeah, I agree. And, I'm trying to decide where I want to go here. Do I want to get into Trump's responsible for January 6th, or do we want to stick with protests here?
Right.
Because these are two separate issues.
I say let's stick with protests, because we could absolutely, and I would love to talk about it. But it's, I mean, I think I know for certain how I feel about it, but because it's still an ongoing case.
Yeah. So, okay, going back to the protest, then I want to get your thoughts on two instances. So, do you know which university it was where the police forcefully removed students from the building they were occupying? Was that at Columbia or UCLA?
Yeah, that was at Columbia, and that building, that building has, since the civil rights protests in the 60s, has been a place where protests have been staged and where like sit-ins have been organized. And I think that's why the students chose to do that. I think that the university should have allowed them to do it, but like approach them in a more collaborative effort, being like, hey, we're going to let you guys, occupy this hall. And I forget what the hall is called. But we're going to let you guys exercise your free speech. We're going to let you guys do this, but could you guys make some compromises so that, we're not cutting the legs out from under you, but we're making sure that like everyone's being safe, that, property isn't being destroyed, which I think the only thing that happened was they broke a window, which given the amount of people that were there, I think should not characterize the protesters as a whole. But essentially what I'm saying is I think the whole thing is gross mismanagement, and a lack of just common sense on the part of the university.
Yeah, so you're saying maybe just give them a part of the building to occupy.
I mean, I think that they should have let them, occupy the building. Not pushing them away, but they could have done that, and it absolutely would have been disruptive. But it has to be disruptive in order to actually like make an impact. But the university could have avoided hate speech, destruction of property, whatever the consequences that made things unsafe or caused unnecessary harm that ultimately harmed the movement as a whole and gave it less legitimacy.
Right, but if you're allowing them to occupy the building, then you're denying resources to other students, because then other students therefore are unable to access that building because there's another group that is occupying it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's where I'm kind of like, okay, I think maybe just letting them occupy, and I don't know the layout of the building, but if maybe there's like okay, you can occupy this part of the building, but then again, what if there's a class supposed to be being held there?
Yeah.
And so I think so. There was an example of a protest of students who were blocking the most direct entrance to a building, and so students were being
to a parking garage. I believe that was Penn State.
Okay, were they blocking the only access to the parking garage, or
from what I understand, what they were blocking was technically a parking garage, but really what it was like the main entrance to like the campus as a whole.
Okay. Yes. Okay. I remember that because there was a student, correct me if this isn't the video that you're referencing, but there was a student who was saying, this is the most direct path I have the right to go through, and they're trying to get through and then they get blocked. Like the students won't let them pass. Okay. So we are
I think it was Penn State.
Okay. So, I mean, in that instance, I can understand where you're coming from of a protest needs to be disruptive. Otherwise, what's the point? So like, yes, they're blocking the most direct path. And so in that instance, I think if you disagree with them, and if you think they're being obnoxious and you don't like the way they're doing it, the best way is to not engage with them.
Yeah.
Like just completely ignore them. I think that's going to be the best, I guess you might call it almost a counter protest, is because you're not giving them, it's like, and not that I'm trying to compare people protesting something they care about to a child, but it's the equivalent of, ignoring a child who's throwing a fit, right?
Oh, okay. I was gonna go like the advice to deal with bullies is just like don't let them get a rise out of you. I mean, okay. I would kind of agree. The thing is if they did, so the protesters, would not have accepted, I think, being pushed to one specific part of the building. And if they're not going to accept it, they're going to be disruptive anyways. So given the option between letting them be there and not threaten other students or say vile things that are maybe not necessarily illegal, but still vile and hateful and have no place in, reasonable discourse, or having a police presence that is incredibly aggressive and makes the university and police look really bad. Like, given the choice between avoiding that stuff and letting them do the same thing, but making sure or all that stuff happening. Because either way, students like the protest is going to be disruptive. They just could have handled it better, or they could have divested from the contribution to Israel's ability to commit war crimes, as at least according to the International Criminal Court.
Right. So, but that's a slippery slope of letting students dictate divestments of a college campus, because
they're paying the tuition.
They're paying the tuition, but if you just let any student protest, and then, so if a student decides to protest because they don't like something that the company's invested in, where do you draw the line? What if you have a bunch of vegan students who are protesting a college campus who, or they're maybe a college has divestments in, I'm going to skew words here, but like some sort of like a meat plant or something like that, or something that's involved with a meat plant, and they're vegan and they think it's cruelty. I mean, does this student just get to protest and this college has to just divest because there's a group of students protesting?
Well, so I think they should have the ability. You'd have to get enough vegans for it to actually be disruptive. And also, they're going to lose energy real fast because they don't have adequate protein intake.
So I have a legitimate question here.
I think the thing is, when you have that many people,
so
if it's not going to have the same effect if it's 20 people protesting.
So my question here then, and I'm not trying to make an argument. I want to know what your position is. What would the difference then be if I were to go to a hedge fund manager who I've invested a lot of money in, and said, hey, I see you're investing in Apple. I'm an Android guy. Hate it. I think you need to get out of Apple. And maybe I've got some of the other investors with me, but it's not a majority. We're a minority. We're a vocal minority. How does that compare? Or in a similar situation,
because
I'm a taxpayer. But I'm a taxpayer. You don't have enough
power over him to be disruptive enough.
So
in order for a protest to work, you have to be disruptive, and that requires a lot of people. So if you can get like the rest of the shareholders, like, say, I don't know how many shares of Apple there are, but say you get like, over 50%, and then you go there, I think it's in their best interest to be like, oh, okay, then maybe we should look at some of our investments.
But what about, so then you could say the same thing for taxes though, right? So, because I would even say that if you get 10% of your investment in a hedge fund is going to pull out, unless you pull out of Apple, then that's a significant amount that they're going to want to look at that. But also let's consider, taxes. I mean, how come I pay my income taxes in Indiana, but I don't get the potholes on my street filled, which my income taxes are, but
because
how
that
come I
doesn't
don't
pay
get to
for
choose
potholes.
But how come I don't get to choose?
My Facebook?
No, I haven't. How come
I've been in an argument about street repairs in Springfield for like the last 3 days.
No, it's just
the potholes in Indiana though.
Oh, it's
the
worse.
Potholes
in
Indiana.
I have a coworker who moved here
Midwesting.
from Sheffield and said Sheffield is known in Europe for having terrible roads, and they're worse here in Indianapolis. Anyway, no. So if by your logic, I'm assuming then it would be okay for enough people to protest against taxes being used in certain ways.
Yeah. But if the way that you're protesting that is by not paying your taxes, that is something I would consider civil disobedience. So don't be surprised when the IRS comes knocking and throws you in jail for tax evasion.
Okay.
So do you view the occupying the building? Do you view that as civil disobedience?
That's a tough question. Honestly, I think that I might even include the protest in general. Once the university told them to disband. But that's not to say that I think that I don't support the protesters who were doing so peacefully. I support their decision to not disband and to continue being disruptive, particularly because a lot of them are, I think at Columbia, even this morning, or it might have been the first time that they had the police come in, but one of those times, 100 people were arrested. That creates another type of disruption where it takes resources from the judicial system, and you get enough, people being arrested for peacefully protesting where, technically they shouldn't be protesting. It's going to be, you're going to get more pressure on the university from, the outside government to be like, hey, could you guys just stop taking money for research that, directly contributes these, specific Israeli companies and everything. What I'm saying is the act of getting arrested for peacefully protesting is in its own way disruptive. And that's why civil disobedience is effective.
I think I am surprisingly more liberal on this particular issue than you are.
You fallen into my web.
No. No, not because of that.
Come over to the dark side, Cameron.
Oh, jeez.
Give in to your feelings.
As a social studies teacher, right, I've had to teach a lot.
You teach social studies?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. We got to talk about that, man.
No, but so I not only do I teach social studies, but I teach at an inner city school where 75+% of my students are African American.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, we lived in Alabama, where segregation arguably is still going on in a de facto manner.
Right. But surely you didn't live in Poland or study communist Eastern Europe, right?
Have I mentioned that before? I don't know. Anyway, what I'm trying to say though is I've had to teach and have been to some of these places where the civil rights movement happened. I've been to Mobile. I've taught students who are directly affected by these policies.
So I had the urge to be like, it's pronounced mobile.
But I'm of the opinion that if I agree that if you're causing property damage or if you're harassing other people, absolutely not okay.
Mm.
But I think people get arrested for protesting.
Harassing or making credible threats of violence against them?
I would say both, but that's a different topic.
I mean, harassing is, I think,
it depends on the harassment.
Spectrum.
You're right. I would say somewhere along there's a line that I don't want to get into right now, because the point I'm trying to make is I think people get arrested too early for protests.
Yes,
I mean, you think about the sit-ins at the grocery stores in Birmingham and Mobile. You think about the blocking of the highways and just marching. right? It's easy for us to look at things now and say, oh, we don't think this is the right way. But then 60 years later, we look at the past and say, well, yeah, of course it was totally fine for them to block the freeway, block the bridge, sit in the grocery stores because they were fighting for their rights. And I am of the opinion that I'm going to make a distinction between riots and protests. The majority of the time, the protests have, I don't want to say had the right argument, but had the right idea, right? Because most protests at the end of the day have been in favor of human rights and liberty. And they might be misunderstanding, or they might be advocating for those in the incorrect way. But the general, when it boils down to it, I think they have the right idea. And so as someone who has to teach a lot of constitutional...
that they're fighting against is wrong. Or the thing that they're fighting for is like right, like as a concept.
Right, yeah, because
they may have a bad take on it, which I think a lot of pro-Palestinian protesters have. I think the majority of people who are supporting Israel, yourself included, Cameron, certainly have a bad take on it. But
I mean, it just depends.
That was last episode.
Yeah, last episode. I think it depends, because really at the end of the day, what it comes down to is people are exercising the right to free speech.
But almost none of them, even on the public universities, had a right to free speech the way that you would if you were protesting, in a public space that's not on a university campus.
I will agree that it gets muddied because it's on a university campus versus Main Street. They have
extra provisions that allow them to limit certain activities.
But I am a big First Amendment believer, and I think that the second we try to limit that, we're going to run into a lot more problems. I don't know. I know you're saying you agree, but I still think
they didn't have the right to free speech. Yeah. They absolutely should have still been speaking. And the universities are the ones who really screwed up.
Yeah, no, I'm not taking any issue with that. I think I understood what you meant by that. I guess what I'm saying is I don't see a problem at all with the protests that are happening, because I can look at a protest and say, I disagree with you. I think what you're saying is not correct, but I think you absolutely should go out and protest.
Yeah.
I absolutely disagree fundamentally on every level with the Occupy Wall Street, with, protests. But at the same time, I love that you're doing it. Go ahead, man.
Yeah.
Well, and so to further bring about, your point of, because I think what you said was pretty poignant, Cameron, about, we look at 60 years ago and how in the moment they didn't seem justified. And so I can't help thinking of Rosa Parks. What she did in refusing to give up her seat on the bus was illegal.
Yeah.
But, in hindsight, but she celebrated. And, and so...
Also not the first person to do that.
Oh, okay.
There was a young girl who did that before Rosa Parks. And I'll admit, I forgot her name. I was going to say Ruby Bridges, but Ruby Bridges is the first...
desegregation.
First African-American student to...
go to a white school.
Yeah, to go to a school that was desegregated.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main idea here is that America is built on this idea of revolution against immoral laws, right? It was illegal for the United States to revolt against Britain. It was illegal for us, to invade the South by the Constitution,
America.
Right?
It was illegal for Jesus Christ to speak out against the Pharisees. And he wasn't killed because he was the Son of God. He was killed because he committed insurrection according to the laws of the day. And I think that influences most Western cultures through the by the way, I was talking about the historical perspective, not I wasn't like,
I know what you mean. I watched Jim McClellan on TikTok. I know what you mean.
But I mean, the protesting and speaking truth to power and challenging things that are unjust, regardless of whether they are sanctioned by the law, I think is one of the cornerstones of certainly Western democracies. But there's so much nuance there that oftentimes
Yeah,
it doesn't play out the way that it should, or
yeah,
opinions
because
change over time.
well, and because there's such a fine line between protest and civil obedience of civil obedience in the sense of I am occupying a building and being disruptive, to other protests that, like an example of a protest from George Floyd, where people were literally running into Target and just stealing things, right?
Right.
Or where but there's like
Yeah.
massive disruption. And so I think that's what makes this conversation so difficult, is because of how easily it can just spin out of control. And I think we can all agree that if, breaking the window was not a good thing to have happened,
Yeah.
and, blatantly damaging a building, burning something, anything, or harming an individual, that's not a protest, that's a riot. And that's
Right.
just chaos. So
I don't think that those people are protesters, though. If you're looting,
yeah.
if you're there to do something other than contribute to the cause, and or if you are there to contribute to the cause, if you're doing so in a way that delegitimizes the cause, you're not a part of the protesters. You're a rioter. But I think in the George Floyd case, what a lot of people got angry at is that a lot of the protesters, particularly protesters who were part of the POC community, weren't really upset with the looters or the people setting fire, and they were like, well, why aren't you condemning this? And I think the difference there was put by this video on TikTok of this black woman who said, people talk about how, they're burning they're burning our stores, they're burning, like, they're hurting our community, but we never owned any of it. And that's why we're here. And so they weren't going to let themselves be deterred by these, bad apples, because they didn't really have any investment or ownership of it in the first place. And the thing that they were trying to change was exactly that.
So I want to bring things back full circle here to how we started. And that is, these protests are only getting media attention because they're negative.
Yes.
And because negativity sells.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the only reason we're even having this discussion. And so I think, if you think about it, protests happen every day for one way or another. We only hear about the ones that get out of hand because it's what sells. But that's also how change happens.
Well,
is because they get out of hand.
I think that, again, the universities are misstepping, because at least with Columbia, they have actively kept out journalists from covering these protests. And like, I forget who it was, but somebody was going around, like, to the protests on campus, asking the students that were actually there, or the, like, students who weren't a part of the protest but were walking to class, and they were like, yeah, it was like 20 guys out there and they were, like, chanting, but, like, I'm just on my way to class. But because they're not allowing, like, reporters in there to actually give the full story, what we are seeing are the juicy sound bites and TikTok clips of the the entertaining stuff. And so it's getting more attention than it really probably should, which fuels that kind of fire.
Yeah I agree. Well, I feel like we've gone on for a very, very long time. Had a very good, productive conversation, but
I
It
think
was great
I
listening
think
and interjecting.
it was great talking with you. I
Yeah.
was a little nervous about this because when Cameron and I have talked about inviting guests onto the show, I've always kind of been of the opinion that like while it's incredibly important to talk to people who you don't agree with, it requires a lot of trust. And Cameron and I,
It does.
have
Yeah.
the history that we trust each other, and I wasn't sure how it was going to work, but I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, I did too. And, listening to people is so important to me. And something that I've talked about in my own podcast multiple times is validation does not have to mean I agree. I can validate your position, and I can say I understand where you're coming from. I disagree, but I understand where you're coming from. That is where the productive conversations happen, right?
Yeah,
Is when,
absolutely.
you can respect each other's opinion. So I appreciate you letting me ask these questions and us being able to have this open dialogue. And I think it takes two people who are willing to listen and listen to understand, not listen to defend, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I know that I probably took up more than my fair share of the airtime. But
Well, to be fair, she was also supposed to ask you questions and interview you,
Yep.
which is kind of how this.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
Yeah. So I do want to ask just one final question.
Boxer briefs.
I was going to say, do you know the Muffin Man?
The Muffin Man?
The Muffin Man!
Who lives on Drury Lane?
Alyssa and I have
She's
this exact conversation all the
Man.
time. The Muffin Man? The Muffin Man! My wife and I just did this a couple days ago. Anyway, keep going.
Okay.
Your last question.
Yeah, your last question.
All right. So how do you think you developed your moral triggers? If you don't have a good answer for that question, that's fine if that's too left field, but how do you feel like you developed or how do you feel like your moral triggers were formed, or how did they develop?
I want to point out the word trigger gets a lot of hate. I want to point out that we're not using this in the whole
word trigger is ironically a little triggering, but right. I think I understand what you mean.
Okay. Yeah.
Like how did I develop the things that like get my hackles up? Yeah. Or that just really bother me that I can't not address?
Or how did you come to decide that you believed in women's right to choose and a women's bodily autonomy? How did that develop for you?
I mean, I that one specifically, and I want to like start off with clarifying that I think that people should care about women's rights regardless of their relationship to women. But I would be lying if I didn't acknowledge the fact that I within my family have just some incredibly just incredible women. Whenever people ask me who my heroes are, the first two people that I reference or that I talk about are my mom and my sister. And just the so for that one specifically, seeing the things that they struggled with, seeing the opportunities that they had to fight for way harder than their peers had to fight for, and the fact that my sister is hands down the smartest person I know, and anyone who's met her would likely say the same thing. And I can confidently say I have the best mom in the world.
I do. Please. Sorry.
Agree to disagree.
Sure.
But I mean, it was, while I would hope that people, like for instance, I feel like a lot of people are like, I feel really strongly about like protecting women from sexual assault because my sister was sexually assaulted, and it's like, well, you should have cared about that regardless. But sure. But that's obviously having two of my biggest role models being the women in my life does have an effect. In general, what I would say in terms of like moral triggers is I have a very, very rigidly defined sense of what I think I have a hard time when I feel like something isn't fair.
Okay.
And that's, a lot of times that's like, this isn't fair to me, but politically, I think a lot of times is me thinking that that's not fair for, someone else.
Okay.
So like, with Palestine, it's not fair that they, that Palestinians are being characterized by the actions of Hamas, and that we're not, that we're more or less allowing Israel to do things that otherwise we wouldn't be okay with a country doing to a quote unquote sovereign nation. And so that's why I feel very strongly about that. And it's about fairness, and it's about my personal sense of what is just.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I see where you're coming from, and we're going to end it there before I start trying to enter the Israeli-Gaza debate, because so many follow-up questions or follow-up points that I wanted to bring up because I did listen to that podcast episode.
Oh, yeah, and that was I think that was, depending on where you stand on that, that's a particularly frustrating episode, but I think it's also one of my favorite episodes. But what I will say is you've maybe not entirely. I still have my reservations about having guests on the podcast, but you've definitely you've opened the door so that others can walk through it, and I think I'd be open to having you again if that is something that you'd like to do.
Yeah, I think I would. I think I would love to. I think the only issue we're going to run into is I just don't want you to feel ganged up on, because I think Camron and I align more.
Well, look, and to be fair, if we're going to have Liz on, who's more on my side, you've got to have someone on who's more on your side.
Ooh, that might be interesting.
I like to think that Camron was already so outmatched that you just leveled the playing field.
Oh. All the testosterone in the air. I just can't.
On that note, okay, as I'm telling you guys today,
that's been agreeable disagreements.
As I'm telling you guys today, hey, might be late to recording because I'm waiting for my haircut. You say, okay, I'm good anytime. Andrew says, cool, yeah, I'm just going to head to the roastery. Let me know when you're going. And I said, great. I live like 10 minutes away, so it shouldn't be a big deal. And he said, oh, great, I live 7 minutes away from the roastery. And my first reaction was, oh, that's very convenient. My second reaction was, did he just one-up me about his commute?
No. And then I was 30 minutes late.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. We were supposed to, I was supposed to be at the roastery at 4. Because you texted me pretty much right at 3:50.
Yeah, right around there.
I left the house. Well, I arrived at the roastery at 4:02, and then I think I logged on pretty squarely at 4:30.
Well, to be fair, part of that is because we also had the Riverside software crashed for quite a while. So that's
You
not
guys had
entirely
that set up
you.
by the time I logged in.
We were in here for like a minute before you got in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we weren't in here very long.
Yeah,
So you were right on time, my
was-
dude.
Yeah. Well, Liz, do you wanna plug your podcast one more time?
Please do.
Yes. So Mental Health Matters. Look for Liz Lange. I really enjoy doing it. It's with Dr. Mark Burton, and our goal is just to destigmatize mental health and just this idea that it's okay not to be okay, and that it's okay to need help.
That's
And
fantastic.
where can we find?
Yeah,
Where can we find the
find it?
podcast?
Anywhere you get a podcast. So Apple, Spotify, Pandora. I don't think apparently Google Podcasts isn't a thing anymore, so don't try there.
Yeah, they lopped it into
Everything?
YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
We're on
that's
YouTube.
where I listened.
Yeah, we're on YouTube. That's a new thing, I will say. I don't have, and if any Mental Health Matters listeners are watching this on YouTube, now they know what I look like. Because they've never seen a recording of me and Mark. I'm not very savvy with the video editing. And so, but we are, but my podcast is on YouTube, and we've done a couple of good episodes. We recently actually
Only a couple. The rest are absolutely terrible.
Okay, to be fair, I've been doing
I'm
podcasts
absolutely
for like
kidding.
for like 3 years. But yeah, our most recent one was can breathing cure anxiety and depression. So that was.
It certainly would hurt if you weren't breathing.
Yeah, I was going to say
the
not
conclusion-
breathing would cure it better.
Right? Well,
That's.
I went with it.
I wouldn't say better, faster. I don't know.
Now,
More
now we
permanently.
have to put the suicide hotline phone number in our episode description, Cameron.
988 is that number. If you or someone you know is suicidal,
Yes.
please call or text 988. But no, I actually came up with the premise. It might not cure anxiety and depression, but it does cure death. So
That's true.
less
There we
morbid
go.
there, Cameron.
There you go. Yeah,
That's true.
This is the positive spin.
Yeah.
Andrew, why don't you do our little outro, and then I have a fun fact for you.
Okay. Absolutely huge thanks to Liz for joining us and giving us a great battery of questions. Also, thank you to Halcyon Club for providing our intro and outro music that is off their EP Headset Emotions. And thanks for listening. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook.
YouTube, and wherever you find your podcast. Yeah.
Thanks for having me, guys. This was a lot of fun.
So here's your fun fact. Ancient Egypt is so old that in what we consider to be ancient Egypt, there were careers for people who were archaeologists for ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
Wow.
We live closer
insane.
to Cleopatra than Cleopatra did to the building of the pyramids.
She did. She lives closer to the iPhone than she did to the pyramids. It's crazy.
That's a great way to put it.
Wow.
Yep.
All right.
Wow.
On that note, thanks for listening.
Bye, guys.